All right, if that's working, this ought to be Friday night, February 12th, 1982. 9. Okay, we'll see if that's picking up a little better. Try one more. Okay, I hope that works. Good evening, and welcome to all the familiar faces, and welcome to the faces that are not familiar. This class, which is the second time round for this, was entitled at least, Marriage Go-Round in the beginning, because it was asked for by some married couples who wanted to sharpen up their relationship. Or soften up their relationship, maybe, as the case may be. And then others began to be interested in what was going on because lives were beginning to be changed and relationships were beginning to be changed. So we now just call it the relationship class because we have singles who may also want to know what went wrong or how to do it right the next time. And basically what it is about is that we are exploring new role models. And we can speak with some authority about this activity now because whereas we were starting from scratch the first time round, we now know that the principles that were brought through are very solid, sound, the methods work. And that it therefore is a question of whether or not we wish to change the nature of our relationships, because they can be changed, and whether or not we are willing to explore new role models. And the last class certainly found out that it was, because the rewards were sufficient. So we found the last time that the most important... Now, first of all, a couple of ground rules. One is, Kitty at the back of the hall is my Matthew. That is my tax collector. And so if you will give her your checks and the new people your name, give her your name, please. And the class is $5 per class.
You say and phone number.
Oh, and phone number, yes. Please give Kitty your phone number just in case lightning should strike and the class would have to be canceled. We would want to let you know ahead of time. If you miss a class, you will find that each class precedes the one that follows, and the one that follows is dependent upon the preceding one for its full understanding. So it's a good idea, if this interests you, to try to be here because you'll get behind. Or you can pick up the class before the next one by hearing the tape. And if you do, in that case, it will also be $5. Are there any questions that anybody wants to ask about that? All right, this is a workshop class. In spite of our rather formal setup here, which I'm not crazy about, it's a workshop class, as every class I ever have taught has been. For having brought yourselves here and paid your dues, you are entitled to have your questions answered at the moment that they come to your attention. So please don't hesitate to interrupt me. You'll catch on as we go along exactly how we do that. Don't let anything pass that you don't understand. I mean, for instance, one of the... I can't call it a problem, but one of the tasks that the new people will have will be to catch on who are somewhat specialized vocabulary. It isn't mysterious, it's just that for purposes of communication, sometimes we find a hot phrase or two that seems to get the point across, and it may not have meaning for you if you haven't been here before. So don't let anything pass that troubles you, to which you feel a resistance, or simply want clarification. I mean, I am totally at the class's disposal for that, and I wouldn't be the only one that could answer the questions, and I won't be the only one that does answer your questions. It is a workshop class. Clear? So we're going to do this together. The difference is that we took a whole year for the last class because I wanted to give the class the fun of ditch digging these principles for itself. I didn't want to spoon feed the class with things that I already knew but they didn't. I wanted it to come out of the class's own development and understanding, so we took a lot of time. We are not going to be able to take that much time because, as most of you know, I'm going to Rome in July. So that this class, this particular series of merry-go-round, is 16 weeks only. There will be 10 weeks of non-negotiables. There will be 4 weeks of negotiables, and there will be 2 weeks on sex. I keep that for the last in case you are scared and want to drop out. You can get all the rest of it. Okay? One of our favorite axioms, and from time to time, I don't recommend a lot of note-taking in most of my classes. I would prefer, your mind is a tape recorder. And I would prefer that you really listen to me, to yourselves, to each other. And if so, you'll find it's all there and you can take the whole class home. Whereas if you take a lot of notes sometimes, you only hear what you're writing down and you miss what comes after. But in this particular class, you will have to take some notes. You will, for instance, have to take notes about what are the 10 non-negotiables. And we will take them up one each week. And you'll probably want to write that down because you will be practicing that non-negotiable behavior for that full week and come back ready the next week to discuss your successes and your failures and what went wrong and what could you do to have done it a little better and so on and so forth. Remember, it's a workshop class. Okay? Now, I think that's everything that I wanted to say ahead of time. So, I'm going to leap right in, and I won't take quite so much time asking you questions so that it comes from you. I will lay down these axioms that we now know are valid, and some of you will be a reminder, and some of you may be the first time you've thought about it. Well, I do want one big question, though. Why a class in role models? Why bother attending or giving a class in role models? Hi, Donna. Hi.
Because we haven't had any?
Oh, no. No. That's all right. That's true. Of course it's true that we haven't had any. The question is, why a class in role models? Because that's what this is all about. Francis?
Because all there is really is role-playing.
Now you got it. Some of these statements that I'm going to lay on you may be startling. Don't reject them out of hand. Let it enter the ear a little bit and think about it. Take it home, muddle with it for a week if you want to. And if you still can't accept something that has been said, then next class bring that up and we'll hash it over. Because I'm going to lay one of those on you right now. The reason for a class in role models is because there is nothing but God consciousness and role playing. That's all there is. There isn't anything else. Everybody role plays all the time, and every person has a number of roles that he plays. He plays one role with his wife. She plays one role with her husband. They both play another role with their children. He and she both play different roles at work. So that the only thing, I'm sure you could accept the idea that you role play all the time. What maybe startle you a little bit is that there's nothing but God consciousness in role playing. That you're just going to have to accept for a few moments. And in order to get the class going, and little by little, I've had a lot of good atheists in the last class, and who were startled by that, didn't want to accept that at all. But before the class was over, they had changed their minds. So that poses no problem. God consciousness. There isn't anything I could say except consciousness and role-playing. We happen at Renaissance World to call it God consciousness, but I don't really care what you call it. The fact is that there is within you something which operates when you say, I. Now think about that. I. And it is the only thing that you can say that you cannot objectify. You cannot make a mental image of that. Now, if you think that when you say I, you are saying Barbara or George or Francis or John, no, that isn't the I I'm talking about. Because this is your me, which is the known, not the knower. And behind every known, there is a knower. Behind every object, there is this infinite subject. And that's your I. And that's what we mean when we say God consciousness. And once you've taken off all the masks and all the roles and get down to I, the true I of your real identity, that's God consciousness. And it constitutes your very being. Now, I don't ask you to accept that. I only ask you to listen to it. Because that has to be proved to you by you. All this class will do for you is give you the recipe. You have to go home and bake the cake. And you won't know it till you bake it and eat it for yourself. I cannot give you the God experience, but I can tell you how to get it. And if you will do that, you will know one day down this line, maybe not too long, because I find as the consciousness develops in Renaissance world, the heat develops and your candle gets hotter and hotter, and pooh, one day it takes fire, and you have that experience that lets you know that there is an I in you that is greater than your me. And that's God consciousness. So the premise we're going to operate from is there's nothing but God consciousness and role playing. Now, you're going to have a chance to ask any hot question you may have. Is there anyone whom that really troubles? Can you take it as a hypothesis for the moment? We got to go a long distance from here. All right. So then, presumably, you're not troubled. Now, the other thing that really isn't an axiom, that's an axiom in the true mathematical sense. This is not. This is just something we discovered and that we were able to acknowledge. And if we can't acknowledge it, it's pretty hard to get this class off the ground. And that is this. It's a class in relationships. And we acknowledged and you think about this while I'm saying it, my behavior has damaged my relationships. Anybody who can't accept that? Or say that, or who has no experience that would validate that? All right, then that goes down. That goes down. My behavior has damaged my relationships. And that's one of the cornerstones where we're going, because we will find out that there's only one person on earth you can change. Numero uno. And you can elicit changed behavior from somebody else, but only after you have changed. Okay? All right, now what do we mean? We discovered then that... Oh, no, got another thing I want to lay down first. Sure. Every relationship is an implied contract. Very ignorantly entered into by most human beings, 99 and 44/100% of human beings, enter into these implicit contractual relationships not knowing what they're doing. And I'm a classic example. Some of you are classic examples too. What do I mean by that? I mean that you have, when you enter a relationship, if you're a human being, what we call a 3D human being, living in the 3D world. Because we want our relationships to get into the fourth dimension. And that's where the new role models will come from, is the fourth dimension, not the third dimension. We have to create a new kind of human being that the world has not yet seen. And we've been through the last class in the process of doing that, and we have seen healings in relationships so that we know it is possible through these methods and these principles to create a better kind of relationship than we have ever known. Clear? All right. In the 3D sense, when we enter into these relationships, we're usually plenty ignorant. And I say that it's an implied contract because we have expectations. Acceptable? Every relationship we have ever entered into, except the ones we were born into and had no say about for a while, we had expectations about the relationship. Therefore, at least to us, there was a contract in effect, an implicit contract. The trouble is, the person with whom we entered into the relationship had his secret contract too. He had his implicit contract that he had in his mind, and it didn't match the contract that the other one had in her mind at all. And that's where the friction in these relationships come from, is in a crash of expectations. More on that later. Therefore, we decided last time that since the contractual nature of relationships is natural and implicit and unavoidable, therefore, that the method we were going to explore was to see if we couldn't create a contract that we both knew about that would work. And that's what we set about doing. And the first thing that we discovered, and I might as well take a little detour to say that when the class began, because it was a class that unfolded, I didn't have any more idea where that class was going than anybody else sitting there. We all did this together. It unfolded together. The principles came forth from the class itself. The methods were derived from the class itself. But now we do know them. One of the things that we found was that we were uncovering all of these principles, and back here we had the idea that these were the things we're going to lay on our relationship. And then about a third or half the way down the class, all of a sudden the light got switched, and we found out that it was each one of us that was being challenged to see, can you fulfill the terms of that contract? And we saw that it's not a question of asking somebody else to fulfill the terms of the contract. That the shoe has to go on numero uno's foot first. Am I capable of fulfilling the terms of the contract as I have set it down? And if I'm not, I have no right to ask anybody else to do that. So, instead of all this nice thing of the lasso we were going to put on somebody else, it quickly got turned to our own behavior that had to be changed. Now, one other ground rule. This class, therefore, is dealing with a contract, a relationship contract, being devised by adults. It is a contract for adult to adult. this class is specifically not a class in parent-child relationships. It is not that at all. Now, not only is it not a class in parent-child relationships when they are legitimate parent-child relationships, but it is not a class in relationships that are pretending to be adult-adult, but which are still, in fact, parent-child relationships. Think about it. There's not one of us who doesn't have the child in him, and there's not one of us who doesn't possess a parent in him, and there's not one of us who doesn't have an adult in him. But which one do we really use in our relationships? Sometimes both parent and child is required of us. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can be playing child and trying to force the other person into the parent role, and that person has no desire at all to be your parent. Let us say, for instance, if I'm a girl, I may be still looking for dad. And I'm looking for a man who will let me sit in his lap and hold me and rock me and take care of me. But he's looking for mother. Now that relationship doesn't have anywhere to go. When you know what you're doing, when you've made your contract adult to adult and both adults are in gear, you can then role play your child when you need to be helped. And if your relationship has been healed by virtue of this class, your relationship partner will recognize your need and be willing at that moment only to fulfill it. And tomorrow the roles may be reversed, so that it's all right to be childlike. We never have to lose the childlike quality in us. It's where all your charm comes from. No adult is charming. Only child is charming. But charm isn't enough for a relationship. There also has to be some adult operating. There's a tremendous difference between childlike and childish. And childish is death to a relationship. Okay? All right, I'll give you one other hard axiom, and then that'll be all for tonight, because I want to get into the first of the non-negotiables. Any relationship based in need is sick. Once more. Any relationship based in need is sick. That'll be proved to you as we unfold the 10 non-negotiables. What are the non-negotiables? Oh, no, one other thing I have to say first. This contract that we will learn to develop, this relationship contract, is a contract about behavior only. It will never have to do with anything but behavior. We do not exercise thought control on each other. In other words, if your behavior is appropriate towards me, I don't care whether you like me or not. And we will learn that that's all we have the right to ask of another human being is appropriate behavior. And that that's all we owe another human being is appropriate behavior. And if my behavior is appropriate, I can keep my private thoughts private. Clear? All right. What are the non-negotiables? As we began to uncover this contract, what kind of contract do we want? What kind of contract do we have to have in a relationship? We uncovered the fact that there were certain things in a relationship about which we would be willing to say, I cannot survive in the relationship if I cannot have that in the relationship, whatever it is. One non-negotiable. On the contrary, I cannot survive in the relationship if this behavior is present. Now, the 10 non-negotiables are like coins. There is a positive aspect to each one of them, and there is a negative aspect to each one of them. And the positive aspect is what we uncovered we had to have in the relationship in order that the relationship could survive. And the opposite side of that was, if that's in the relationship will not survive. I will not, in other words, it comes down to, I must have this, I will not tolerate that. And that's the two sides of a non-negotiable in this relationship contract, item by item. Now, we can go faster because the 10 non-negotiables are no longer a mystery to us. We know, some of us, what they are. And so they are in ascending order of difficulty. I'm going to give you just the positives because we'll take them then. I don't want to take too much time because we're going to get into it one at a time. Well, no, we'll take the time to do that. The first non-negotiable in this contract of relationship between two adults is courtesy. Now, don't take that lightly. One other aspect about the contract that's very, very important. You can't have a contract unless both parties are capable of fulfilling it. Capable of fulfilling it. Now, as we uncovered the 10 non-negotiables, there isn't any question that any human being in his right mind would be capable of fulfilling them if he wished to. And I use he generically because it's a contract for women as well. So that it's a contract of behavior. Both parties must be capable of fulfilling it. In other words, you can't put in as a non-negotiable anything that the other party is not able to fulfill. Do you see that? Now you can think about a contract in very strong business terms, because this is a business-like contract. No contract is worth the paper that it's written on if there are any of its terms that are incapable of being fulfilled. As we go through these, you'll find out that there aren't any that are incapable of being fulfilled. The opposite side of courtesy is, of course, rudeness. Now, what that means, being number one of the non-negotiables, of the non-negotiable, you all understand what I mean by a non-negotiable. That means that's not subject to negotiation. That there's no argument, no question, no opinion involved at all, and no changes of viewpoint. It's a non-negotiable. Can't be negotiated. It's flat. So that, in effect, what this first one is saying, I want no relationship unless courtesy is present and rudeness is absent. So you can put that in your notes if you want to take notes. The first non-negotiable is courtesy versus rudeness. And I think we'll do it the same way we did last time. We'll just take these one each week, so we can talk about this now. Courtesy is just good manners. And in the whole year that this class went on before, we found out that courtesy places no restraint of any kind on your communication, because there isn't anything that you cannot say to your relationship partner, not anything that can't be said, as long as it is expressed in a courteous way. On the other hand, the one thing that will destroy the relationship is to express anything in a rude way. And now we're really talking about my behavior having damaged my relationships. Now, you think that isn't possible to a human being? It is possible, because we are proving it. We've already proved it for a year. It is possible to bring total courtesy into your relationships. And it is possible to remove totally from your relationship rudeness. So we're talking about, and this is the easiest one since this is the first one, we're talking about good manners in the relationships as a non-negotiable. That there just isn't any question that nobody is ever going to break the rule of good manners. Think about it for a minute, and then let's talk about whether you think you can do it or not. Let's talk about what situation might possibly arise where it would not be possible to fulfill that. One of the things that we uncovered in doing this class before was that, since I've said anything can be expressed, it was always just a question of finding the right way to say it. And I was amazed, and the class was amazed, at how little we knew about the right way to say it. But there is a right way, and those are the part of the principles that we uncovered. A lot of the method that developed in the last class was simply changing your dialogue and developing the right dialogue to handle every given situation with. Suzanne had her hand up first.
Well, it seems to me that sometimes when you are at a very, very low point, it might be difficult to be polite, such as if you're very
Hungry, tired, lonely.
or if you're just, real tired.
It's an axiom. They're not up there right now, but there will be, probably by next week, our signs. There's a lot of signs around this room. I see our happiness board signs are down too. Why did they have? Oh, for the paint. Yeah, let's get them up by next week. On this wall, we have the 12 steps from the third to the fourth dimension. And on this is our fourth dimensional wall over there, which you'll just have to imagine for the moment, and our signs aren't up, about certain axioms that operate when you are living in the fourth dimension. One of our axioms is, and you have to take this very seriously because you have to take every axiom seriously, don't get hungry, don't get tired, don't get lonely. Those are precisely the three elements that will be the grand stumbling blocks to courtesy. And that's what you're going to practice this next week, is courtesy. Absolute courtesy in your relationships. Courtesy. What right do you have to ask somebody else to fulfill a non-negotiable if each one of us can't do it? You have to be able to do it yourself before you have the right to say, hey, I want you to fulfill that non-negotiable for me. Right? Yes, Adriana.
The situation that has happened to me where courtesy is broken down on my part, and my behavior would be in an emotional situation.
Well, Adriana says that courtesy has broken in an emotional situation, but well, spell that out. Spell that out. Such as?
Well, somebody would say something that for some reason triggered off a feeling in me. It might not have been their fault at all, but it might have stirred something in me that, and I would have emotional reaction, and then therefore my dialogue back to the person might not be
right. That something somebody did triggered an emotion in you, and you lost control of courtesy. Right? Okay? I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another one of fundamental axioms that I should have laid down tonight. In fact, which I will lay down tonight. The one emotion that a human being cannot tolerate, literally not tolerate, is a feeling of powerlessness. There's very good reason for that. When the baby is first born, it is absolutely helpless, and it knows it. It sets up a cry so that somebody will come and pay attention, because there is an instinct operating in that newborn child that lets it know, I'm helpless. If I can't get somebody to help me, I will die. Literally, I will die if I can't get somebody to hear me, to pay attention to me. Now, our way of bringing up these young babies in this society is so far from being perfected that we grow into adulthood with a lot of that fear still in us. That if I get myself into a powerless position, my life is in danger. And that's the reason for all compulsions. Every time we reach for a bottle of booze, reach for sex, reach for food, reach for power, reach for money, reach for success, if it's compulsive, every compulsive piece of behavior is motivated by that blanket terror of being powerless. Now, all kinds of things in our daily lives have a tendency to trigger that sense of powerlessness in us. The boss, who literally has power over us, can do something that triggers it. And because we are so inhibited, we don't shout back at the boss. We go home that night and take that and release that sense of powerlessness, that rage, on those in our home. You won't have to do it, because you've broken all the contract the minute that you do that. If you break the contract, there is no contract in existence as of that moment. There is no contract the instant that it's broken by anybody. Now, what do you do when you don't die? You sit down and decide, you broke your contract, do you want to set up a new one and try harder next time? Or you could say, no, this is too tough, I don't want it, I just want out. And as a human being, sometimes we have to just take the way out. Sometimes we need to go and get some rest and some peace and some recuperation so we can live to fight another day. And nobody can be blamed for that. But it obviously is not so good or so commendable or so constructive as being able to handle and manage your relationships so that you don't have disaster and misery and unhappiness, but so that they become mutually fulfilling and meaningful and supportive. And they certainly can, once we start taking good, sharp looks at the causes that underlie the frictions. And without a single exception, we will find that every cause is some concept or other that we have held for years and years and years, or some kind of expectation that we have held for years and years and years, and the misery comes because we can't get anybody else to read our script. Right? And if somebody not reading my script also happens to make me feel powerless for the moment, right on top of that comes my rage. There's no way, if you are made to feel powerless and you don't recognize it and know how to deal with it in the right way, there's no way that rage will not follow. Because a baby then that would die rather than submit to powerlessness, and some babies do die, they just give up and die. The world calls it crib deaths. Not that at all. It's powerlessness that was totally intolerable. dying was easier. Suicide, without any question, every suicide attempt is because somebody has been made to feel powerless and couldn't cope. And death was easier to tolerate than the emotion of powerlessness. Now, when we really grow up, not only do we get rid of those triggers so that somebody cannot do that to us anymore, but if we slip and do find ourselves in an emotional state, we recognize, somebody's made me feel powerless. And you take a deep breath and settle back on that, and you know how to deal with your feeling of powerlessness because you know that person, not in today's time, does not have the power of life and death over me. And the minute that you can recognize that, your fear that somebody's going to make you be powerless is gone. And with the fear gone, so is the rage gone. And so is the emotion gone, Adriana. Right? So that, once again, if you have an emotional reaction to somebody, you know immediately that person has made you feel powerless. That's the first recognition you have to have. And then you have to immediately get in gear the techniques that you have available to you, not to change the person. You can't change anybody out there, but to change Adriana's trigger. What do? You simply sit down and analyze the situation. Wait a minute. Does anybody really have power over my life? And you know very well they don't. Right? Who else? Okay, what kind of situation causes us to break courtesy? Come on. There's one great sign back there that everybody is going to have come to grips with. It says, what you hide, you keep. It's true. If you know, that's what you're here for. You're here to clean up your relationships. And if you are unwilling to expose the difficulties that you've had, then you're welcome to keep them, and you will have wasted your money and your time. Curtis.
Frustration. Out of frustration, one can kind of feel the only way, if they're really frustrated, feeling powerless again, the only way to really combat that is to pop off in some sort of...
Yeah, Curtis says frustration. But frustration and powerlessness are Siamese twins. So that the real thing I want to establish here is that I don't care how many lighter degrees of anxiety or frustration or impatience or exasperation, you know, they're all varying degrees of those negative emotions. And by the way, there are no valid emotions. So that those that come down in negative degrees until you hit resentment, rage, terror.
Right.
And terror is always connected with powerlessness.
Right.
Well, as soon as we begin to examine this, take a look at it, let ourselves open ourselves up and look, we will find that every one of those emotional explosions has behind it, somebody is giving me this, you know, somebody is pushing or poking or trying to inflict themselves on my freedom. And the human animal will kill to avoid that. You know, some of us have very good inhibitions, and so we don't actually kill somebody, but we do all kinds of little destructive things that have the same result in our relationships, because the relationship is destroyed. Right? Somebody else had his hand up. Who was? Oh, yes, Rob.
Sometimes I'm not even sure when I'm being discourteous, really.
Defined in terms of courtesy is good manners. And that's a very wide and very general definition, I'm aware. But it is easier to define courtesy in terms of what it is not. So let's take a look at rudeness. Because rudeness is the no-no, you see, on the other side of courtesy. Yes?
Rudeness is when you're talking with someone and you're not allowing them to finish their their feelings about something, you're continually interrupting and wanting to say, being a child and wanting to say what you want to say and not even listen.
I like that. I like that. One, and especially as it applies to relationships, there is thank you. Especially as it applies to, since there are lots of kinds of rudeness, but specifically, first of all, does everybody agree that interrupting people is rude? That's a rudeness. Not allowing somebody to finish what he's trying to say to you is first-class rudeness. And it's particularly pertinent in relationships. So I like that one. And we'll put that one down, is interrupting. What else?
I face something to the effect of speaking for someone else. Say you're in a threesome, and someone starts discussing you or something that you've done. I'll take it one step further. No, I'll just stay with that.
It's good. I'm going to give you a word for that.
Mm-hmm.
Usurping.
Yeah.
Usurping. You see, what is a usurper? Well, think of it in terms of British history.
Somebody who knocks somebody off.
Right, knocks somebody off his throne. When somebody's asked a question and you rush in and give the answer, you have usurped, you have violated that person's rights. But it's even worse than that. Usurping is a very serious rudeness. Why? Adriana?
It's like a loss of faith.
It does bring about a loss of faith to the person you have just usurped, but it's even worse than that. Rosalind?
Power and control.
It has to do, yes, and now you see, every one of these non-negotiables is certainly a first cousin and maybe a brother and a sister, in that we take them all apart for purposes of study, but we will find that there are little colors and nuances of each one within each one. Sherry?
I think it brings it back to making someone feel powerless.
It certainly could make the other person feel powerless, but why? Why? You're on the track. And that's why it's a severe rudeness.
It's almost like physically, let's say you're having a conversation, there's three people, and you're talking to one person, and then the third person like physically steps in front of you and just cuts you off from that person. Okay,
expand on that idea of cut off.
They do not, you disappear. They don't allow you.
There's the word. You have negated this person's existence. You just wiped him out like a cipher. You have denied his existence. Do you see that? Severe rudeness is usurping. What else? Somebody has his hand up.
Inattention.
Inattention. Absolutely. And for the same reason, right? Because in a way you're denying that person's existence. That inattention does happen to come later down the line. But certainly it's appropriate here too. It's more appropriate when we get to later and much more serious things. Inattention is subtler and deadlier than usurping. Do you see that? It's subtler because you can still seem to be a person socially acceptable yourself. If you're a usurper, you're getting caught at being rude. You can have inattention, and a lot of people won't notice how terribly rude you're being. You're really denying the other one's existence, but you're being subtle about it. It's more devilish for that reason. And that will come up again. I'm glad you brought it up. Sherry, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was thinking, in my own experience, a lack of tact in anything that you want to say, or the opposite of that would be being real blunt.
Yes, we're going to talk about straightforwardness down the line. But since you brought that up, we might as well go right to it. Sherry says something about a lack of tact being a rudeness, and it is. And since she's brought it up, let's talk about the way of tact in dealing with your relationship partner. And in fact, in dealing with anybody on earth. I've said already that anything can be said under the aegis of good manners. It's a question of how you say it. And I'm going to give you a little formula. It isn't mine. It is not original with me. As far as I know, it was original with Dr. Irene Casorla, whom I greatly admire as a psychologist. She said her formula for saying anything to anybody is begin with 2 honest positives. Now, there isn't anybody, if it's Mama trying to run your life, and she's saying, "Oh, don't wear that coat, that looks terrible." You say, "Mama, I know you love me. And I know you're saying this for my good. But," and that's when you get your fingers in their eyes in a nice way. "But I really am a big girl, Mama. I earn my own living. I have my own apartment. I drive my own car. I speed myself. And so I appreciate it. And I'm grateful you took such good care of me." Then 2 honest positives, but followed by an honest positive. "I really appreciate the care you took of me when I was little. And I'm glad you don't have to do it anymore. Now you can take care of yourself." There's no situation you can't handle. That absolutely disarms anybody. If you will just remember that simple formula. 2 honest positives, but followed by an honest positive. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Just make sure it's honest and make sure it's positive. And there isn't anybody in the sun that you can't find 2 positive things to say about. And follow up. Yes, Donna?
Something happened at work this week that really angered me, and I didn't know quite how to respond. And I could have responded with the formula you just gave. One of the ladies that I work with said, "Did you pull your x-ray today?" She didn't have to ask me. It's not her responsibility. And I didn't answer her. I just turned around because I didn't know how to respond to that.
Of course. And that's why we don't do it right, because we don't yet know how.
Had I known that formula, I could have responded and been very gracious.
Sure. And you would have put oil.
I was rude by not responding.
Yeah. Yes, and rudeness can be an absence. It's an omission as well as a commission very often. And that's, I tell you, I've used that formula for 20 years. It has never, ever failed me. So that put it in your pipes and smoke it, because it'll always work for you. Now, if you would rather just get mad at Mama and rail around, and you really don't want that relationship to be successful, that's okay. Only do it with your eyes wide open. "I don't like you, I'm never going to like you," and forget it. And that's all right. It's all right. Only then don't try to have a relationship, because you won't have one. These formulas, these methods, these principles and procedures are for situations where you want a relationship. Sometimes it's just want to go away, boy, don't bother me. Or I'm not going to deal with that, that's all. I'm not going to deal with it. And you have the right. One other axiom, terribly important for human relationships. Just because somebody asks you a question does not mean you have to answer. You don't have to answer unless you're in a courtroom under oath or before the congressional committee or something of that nature. But just in an ordinary human intercourse, you do not have to answer just because somebody has asked you a question. You have the right. That's one of the ways you're going to be made to feel powerless. You have the right to say, I don't think I'm going to answer that. I don't really want to answer that. I'm not ready to answer that. And if you say it and mean it, they'll back off. They'll back off. You must say it without emotion and really meaning it. Once more, axiom, there are no valid emotions. Every emotion is sick. I can just feel. Oh, how we hate to let go of our emotions. Until we really come to understand that there are sickness. Now then, what is the difference between an emotion and a feeling? Because feelings are valid. Yes, Rosalind?
Emotions have value.
Absolutely. You will find with every emotion that you have, and this is how you will learn to distinguish them, is there's a piece of dialogue that always accompanies an emotion. You should, or you shouldn't, or why didn't you, or are you going to, or that person's out to get you, or God, he's so mean. There's always a piece of dialogue that will accompany an emotion, not a feeling. A feeling has no dialogue with it. So, you check yourselves out this next week when anything stirs you, and if you hear dialogue, check it out as an emotion. Say, hey, wait a minute, this is not valid. It's a piece of conditioning that you have that for the moment you don't know how to prevent, and by which you are definitely being victimized. We are the victim of our emotions. Our feelings are all that is real about us at any given moment. Now, do feelings change? You bet. One other axiom. You never have to justify your feelings. They may be wrong. They may be unjustifiable. But thank God you don't have to justify your feelings. It is enough for you to be able to say, this is the way I feel. And nobody has the right to say you shouldn't, you can't, please don't. It's just, I'm sorry. That's the way I feel. And you must respect that. And when you respect it, so will everybody else. Now, as I said, will your feelings change? Of course. As we mature and begin to understand our place in the world better, understand ourselves better, understand who we are better, come into self-respect better, our feelings change, and the feelings that are not justifiable fall away from us. Take my word for it. It happens. And yet, that's all you are given that moment in time. Right here, right now, all you are is God consciousness and your feelings. Okay? Well, that's enough for one night. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I didn't finish reading. I want to add something.
Could you run through some more emotions?
Yes. These are serious rudenesses. Sarcasm. It is a tool that is unworthy of any decent human being. Language can be rude. Interruptions and usurpings and humiliations that come from things like that. Nagging is rudeness. And those are my little things about rudeness. So what would you like to talk about emotion?
Oh, I was just wondering if there was some more that you might run through. Like, I would think guilt would be one.
Guilt, absolutely. Absolutely. There's no place in the real world for guilt. Why? Because everybody is doing the very best that he can possibly do given his head at any given moment. The minute that we know better, we will do better. And that's true from the day you're born till the day you die. It makes forgiveness of self so easy when you understand that every mistake you have ever made in your whole life has been because you were ignorant of something that you didn't at that moment know, and that you needed to know in order not to have made the mistake. Have I gone too fast for you? Shall I repeat it? About guilt? There's no place for it. Let me tell you. This is an axiom. If you have a piece of behavior that is not up to your best, and you permit yourself to feel guilt and remorse about it, that will guarantee that you will repeat it. You have borne it all over again. You've given it rebirth the minute that you have let guilt and remorse enter. Guilt and remorse are not the proper reaction to mistakes. The proper reaction to a mistake is to see it, acknowledge it, and determine to do better. And that's all there is to it. And where's the room for guilt? When you go about a positive way of dealing with a mistake, because that's all any of our mistakes ever are, is just mistakes. Always committed because we didn't know how to do it any better at the time. Can you buy that? Okay. Do you have any further question about it? Somebody else had a hand up. Yes, Rob.
It's true that guilt sort of keeps you in the past.
Oh, absolutely. Forget it. Cut your losses. Say, learn the lesson from the mistake. Cut your losses. Let it go. I don't ever... Oh, you know something? I used to go to a lot of AA meetings with my dad, and the first thing that I ever heard at a meeting was one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard, and I know they do it at every AA meeting all the time. They say to the person who is coming in, drunk or sober, first thing they say is, you never have to take another drink. And as somebody whose life has been ruined with alcohol, that is a shocking statement. You never have to take another drink. But that's the truth. Because he's there where there's a method available to make that a fact in his life. And so, before this class is over, you will find a lot of mistakes that you have made that you never will have to make again. Because you'll see it, understand it, and you will have determined to take the method that will free you from that forever. So don't ever let the octopus is that mind whip that we all get into from time to time, convince you that guilt and remorse is a useful emotion, because it is they are completely destructive. They have no value. They will not make you a better person. I mean, you know, if guilt and remorse would make you better and make you change, I would recommend it. But it doesn't. It only makes you hate yourself more, and that will guarantee that you will do it again.
Guilt pills.
Why? Because now you've fallen lower in your estimation. And you will outpicture where you are in your head. I'm going to leave you with a terrible statement. What you are is your lowest common denominator.